Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, morning, or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And welcome to today's discussion on the state of K-12 cybersecurity and student data privacy, trends, lessons learned, and planning for the next school year. I'm Jake Kosowski, the communications manager here at ManagedMethods. I'll be your moderator alongside three outstanding panelists in the K-12 IT sector that I'll introduce shortly as folks are joining in with us today. We're going to take a couple minutes to get everyone connected and settled in and everything. But in the meantime, we'd love to hear where you're joining us from. So say hi in the chat or in the Q&A panel if you would like. Let us know how the weather is in your guys' neck of the woods. Here in Boulder, Colorado, where ManagedMethods is based, it's pretty sunny and 85 degrees or so, I believe. Doug, Neal, Greg, I'm not sure how it is out in your guys' neck of the woods, but it's a nice day here in Colorado. Nice. See San Antonio, Texas, very hot. Louisville, Springfield, Illinois. It's awesome. Cool. A couple housekeeping items I'd like to mention. We are recording this discussion. We'll be sending an on-demand version out within 24 hours after this discussion completes. So keep an eye out for that in your inbox. All attendees are muted for this, but again, if you have any questions throughout, please use the Q&A panel or the chat. We'll be sure to try to get to all of those by the end of the discussion, and we'll also have 15 minutes or so at the end for Q&A. So we'll get the panelists' answers to your guys' questions. We're also going to be doing a little bit of an interactive webinar today with you guys. So throughout the discussion, we'll also be sharing a few poll questions with you guys, the audience. I've got my colleague Katie Fritchen here who's going to be helping me out with that and supporting me there. So we encourage you guys to get involved in the conversation on these topics, and we look forward to seeing everyone's input there. Let's see. And with that, allow me to introduce our panelists here. So first off, we have Doug Levin, founder and president of Tech Strategies and the K12 Cybersecurity Resource Center, which ManagedMethods is proud to sponsor and support his report each year. It's pretty important work that he's doing. And if you guys aren't aware, the K12 Cyber Incident Map, it's been pretty instrumental in drawing attention to the emerging cyber threats in K-12 education. So again, very important work there. We also have Greg Hogan, the network data and security coordinator at Bibb County School District in Georgia. And then we're also joined by Neal Richardson, the director of technology over at Hillsboro-Deering School District in New Hampshire. Yeah, so I'd like to start things off with you, Doug, if you don't mind. I know you've seen some shifts in cybersecurity and data privacy trends really since earlier this year, especially when COVID-19 hit and schools had to resort to shutting down for a temporary amount of time. So I wonder if you could elaborate more on what you've been seeing in the past 3 to 5 months-ish, and maybe what you anticipate come the fall when the schools return.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. So, as you mentioned, I maintain the K-12 Cyber Incident Map. And right now I have, built a database of almost 870 school cybersecurity incidents that have been publicly disclosed since 2016. And I released a report in February that detailed the major trends and issues that I saw that happened during the 2019 calendar year. And certainly we saw a large number of data breach incidents, as well as ransomware incidents, right? And those were really two of the big stories from last year. And up until about March, that seemed to be the same story in 2020. It was, just like the calendar year turnover from 2019 to 2020 didn't make a difference. The trends were just continuing. We certainly were still seeing, a good number of incidents occurring. But then really at the beginning of April, really about April 1st, we saw a dramatic shift in the types of incidents being disclosed. And it was really curious in some respects. So you might not be surprised, but the types of incidents that we started to see were those related to compromised remote learning, particularly video conferencing, right? Zoom bombing, but not always on the Zoom, just on the Zoom platform, right? And incidents of data breaches and ransomware attacks pretty much dropped off the map entirely. And I guess I mean that literally as well as figuratively, right? And what's really interesting is to think about why that might be. And so it could be a change in public reporting, right? Maybe since people aren't in schools, they're not disclosing incidents as quickly. But it seems quite likely what's going on is that incidents probably are still occurring, right? But that they haven't been discovered yet. And for me, that's raised a big question, I think, for when students and teachers are back physically in schools, bring their devices back, plug them back into the networks, right? Whether that's, well, it'll be in the fall, probably sometime for everybody. I know that's still being determined in many, many places. But, you know, these are devices that may not be as well protected, right? They may have been compromised, and they may just be waiting to, you know, get plugged back into the networks. And, you know, there was just, I don't know if folks saw, there was just an alert put out by the FBI this week warning schools about a rise in ransomware incidents, specifically targeting remote desktop protocols, RDP, which, you know, is like super concerning right now, because I suspect that RDP is, you know, one of the primary ways that school district IT staff have been able to get their jobs done and provide support to remote users over this period of remote learning. So, you know, given that we haven't seen the public reports, for me, that suggests not that it's gone away, but that we need to be thinking about what the fall might look like when those devices get back onto our school networks. And so I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you, Jake and Katie, and Neal and Greg and everyone here, because I think this is a super important topic to focus on and extremely timely.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug. And then before we switch over to Greg and Neal real quick, we did have an interesting question, I guess, that I think would be a good one for you, Doug, to kind of address there. And it's just defining cybersecurity, and I guess, because, I mean, that's a broad term, I guess, in, you know, how it differentiates, I guess, from, say, network security, you know, just given, you know, the internet is the network of all networks, if you will, I guess.
Sure. And so, yeah, so to be clear, you know, the definition of cybersecurity that I'm referring to here is the protection of computers, computing devices that are interconnected, including to the internet, and, you know, protecting them from attack or unauthorized access. So we're concerned about issues of confidentiality of those systems and the data on those systems. We're concerned about protecting the availability of those systems and access to them, as well as the integrity of the data on those systems, right? To make sure it has not been changed. And so that's a broad definition. A lot of people in K-12 who may not have a security background may be thinking of just student data privacy. And while that's a critical concern of cybersecurity, I've seen many incidents that expose employee and staff data that have scammed school districts out of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. We've certainly seen denial of service attacks that have affected availability, right? So it's a very broad definition is how I look at it, and what my work is looked at.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug. So yeah, Greg and Neal, let's switch over to you guys. You know, are these issues the ones that Doug elaborated on in the past, you know, 3 to 5 months or so, or really since, you know, COVID kind of kicked off, I guess, the outbreak? Are those, you know, things you guys are looking at too, or you guys are things that you guys are seeing in your districts, or kind of what's going on your guys' ends?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we got very little warning as to the change in transition to prepare for a distance learning or offsite remote work. So there was a lot of protocols that kicked in very quickly. Thankfully, our district, Bibb County here in Macon, Georgia, had a lot of good security practices in place, and we had a lot of good security practices in place at a cloud level. So with it being at a cloud level, it really put us at an advantage of not relying on the internal network to help manage keeping things secure, because everybody scattered. I mean, it was everybody left, and then it was figuring out your job as a security administrator a lot of times is to protect your internal network, and now you're flipped on your head a little bit, and you're having to let everybody back into the network from the outside, which is the complete opposite of usually what you're doing. So that was a struggle, but we were able to kind of work through that. The first few weeks were tricky, but yeah, we're definitely thinking about devices coming back in. That is definitely a concern. But we feel pretty confident that we've locked devices down pretty tight, that they should be relatively clean. And again, with that cloud solution in place, those devices are reporting to us through the cloud protocols that if they do have something wrong with them, we're able to address it, lock it down. We're an Office 365 environment, ManagedMethods customer, so we're utilizing those two protocols in place to kind of really help maintain some control offsite.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we're seeing or anticipating the same thing. We know we've got devices out in the wind. We were never a large remote access district to begin with. We try to adopt cloud first because on-prem just gets so expensive so fast. So we've over the past couple of years have been shifting to that model anyways. We are also a managed methods customer, so we do have that visibility. We're a G Suite shop, so that's a little bit different than the O365 as far as feature set and functionality, but the security functions are very similar on both platforms. One of my concerns that I don't know that anyone's really looking at yet is the ICS networks. The stuff for controlling our heating and air conditioning systems. Normally we have human sensors for that. With nobody in the buildings, we've lost our primary sensor, outside of our normal monitoring.
Awesome, thanks. And then kind of let's back up a little bit for Greg and Neal. Would love to get some background real quick on your guys' districts. I know, Greg, you just mentioned you're a O365 shop, Neal, G Suite there. Could we get a little background, I guess, on kind of the demographics of Bibb and Hillsboro-Deering, if you would?
Sure. So Bibb County is in central Georgia. We have about 21,000 students and about 4,000 staff. That would include bus drivers, cafeteria staff, teachers, the whole mill. We are a Windows shop. We do have iPads, but we are primarily focused on Windows and Windows 10 as our platform. All teachers have laptops, and students, we have carts in the schools, so students they don't take their devices home right now, but we're looking to change that next year. But laptops are readily available in the school for all students.
Gotcha. And Neal?
Sure. Hillsboro-Deering is in the southwest corner of New Hampshire. We have 1,100 students and 250 staff, so we're relatively small. We are a Google shop. We've got Chromebooks, grades 3 through 12. The high school takes those home with them every day, so the shift was pretty easy. Now, every student went home with a device, all the way through K. So K12 have iPads initially. As those get damaged or fall off, then we replace it with a Chromebook and we just carry on.
Got it. Yeah, so 3 months ago, mid-March-ish, when schools kind of started closing and students and staff had to stay home, kind of what were the first action items your districts had to undertake there in that rapid transition, if you would?
For us, it was finding out who who needed devices, what students needed devices, what homes were device free or lacking thereof. So we did a district survey, and we put a survey out online just to kind of quickly find out who did not have laptops, who did not have a device. And then the second part was who did not have internet. So we ended up issuing out about 3,500 laptops in that first. We had a week to do it. Again, a day's notice that we were shutting down, but we had a week to do it, and then we issued 1,600 hotspots. And we were very blessed and lucky in the sense of 6 months prior to that, we had applied for a grant through Sprint called the $1 Million Project, and it was to provide a smartphone, a hotspot phone for kids that did not have internet at home, underprivileged kids or low-income areas. And we had an abundance of those available, so we kind of shifted gears and made those available very quickly for students that didn't have internet. So that was our first action items, was devices and internet.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very similar for us as well. We were in a leadership meeting and the decision was made, we're going to send devices home with our students. Within 30 minutes, because we're small, we're a little more agile. We were able to get devices and charging cords stripped out of all of the carts and charging stations into the hands of students when they left by the end of the day. So, that was, maybe 2 hours between decision making and the students left. But because we were already doing sort of allowing the students to take the devices home at the high school level, there was some initial hesitation at the lower levels, but we were able to reassure them that it wouldn't be an issue. Our next thing we looked at was internet connectivity. Because we're in New Hampshire, we're in a hilly mountainous area, so Wi-Fi is not a solution. Those hotspots are good if you've got the coverage, but most of our students that don't have internet connectivity is because they're tucked in and they don't have cell signal either. So that was our biggest challenge.
Gotcha. And then say after a week or so in that transition there, any, I guess, trends you guys are kind of seeing that's a little bit different than when students and staff were in school Monday through Friday, 7 to 8 hours a day, and now they're remote? Kind of anything you guys saw shift at all in terms of maybe activity or I guess things on the outside, if you will, since it was, like you said, Greg, it was kind of flipped. The script was flipped.
Yeah, I mean, bandwidth-wise, obviously, internally, just basically flatlined. So, resources internally were non-existent. As for activity out in for like on the firewall level, it kind of stayed the same. I mean, the outside intruders are still going to try and get in. That didn't really pick up, but definitely outbound traffic kind of went away, and the threats of any type of like sites being accessed, that type of firewall activity and content filter level activity went down considerably from inside out the network. Now, we had to take into account that we needed to still filter these devices off the network. And thankfully, the solution that we have in place here allowed us to do that. So the devices that we sent home at the student level especially continued to be filtered just like they were on network. So that gave us also a level of assurance that these devices weren't going to be hitting sites that they didn't need to be hitting. There was still some security in place for that. So
awesome. Neal, anything, I guess, trend-wise that may have been a little bit different than pre-COVID?
Oh, from what I saw, yes. One of my indicators of compromise was typically, I know when the students are going to be on site. I know, what their login activity is like. I know what their browsing habits are like. All of that shifted. So now I've got high school students that are accessing the internet at, 2, 3 in the morning, where before that would be an indicator to me. Something's not quite right. That's not a pattern that we've been following, or something shifted. We no longer have that. So we're relying more heavily on our filtering capabilities, which we already had in place because we were already sending those devices home. So we added another another solution. So I've got two filters going just to catch those gaps. But that's what we saw or are seeing.
Hey, Jake, if I can interject, I just wonder, Neal and Greg, if you could talk about like what the expectations were for teachers and students while you were in remote learning. And the reason I ask that is in my local school district, and I'm based in Virginia outside of DC, they essentially did sort of a best efforts sort of approach, but they essentially taught no new material from when we went out because of the pandemic to the end of the school year. And so therefore, you know, there wasn't a ton of synchronous video conferencing going on, right? There wasn't a ton of traffic. There was some, but it was much reduced. And I know other school districts tried to move on without, you know, sort of missing a beat, right? And every class, you know, tried to keep up and get through as much material as they could. What was the approach that was taken in each of your districts?
I think initially for us, it was almost too much and too stressful for the teachers and the parents at home. There was an expectation of, okay, we're going to do a full day of school at home. And very quickly, I think the administrative level just realized that's just not how it's going to work. You can't expect parents to help facilitate and teachers who have kids of their own at home too, to try and do a full class session, 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., whatever, at home. So the first couple of weeks, there was just kind of like this is what it's going to be. And then it very quickly became a realization of, okay, we've got to change this. So instead of like daily assignments, it turned into kind of like weekly assignments. And instead of the assignments being due at 4 p.m. every day, it was like they're due at midnight every day, or they're due at the end of the week kind of thing. And it kind of, we had to change the model to fit the circumstances. And once we kind of got in the flow of that, it started to work well, but we still realized that there was a lot of work that needed to be done, and we still ended school early. I mean, we closed school, I think, in May versus when we normally at the beginning of May versus at the end of May, because it was just too much for teachers and parents all at once. So it gave us some time. It gave us an extra month. It gave the administrative staff an extra month for the summer to kind of refocus and reshape what the school year is going to look like in August and what the expectation should be.
Yeah, and for us, our approach is a little bit different. We started focusing right off on the students and home life. We knew that we couldn't deliver the same quality of education that we were in the classroom. We didn't want to set our expectations so high that the teachers were stressing out, the parents are stressing out, and the students are stressing out. But at the same time, we still wanted to achieve our end goals, you know, keep the curriculum going forward. So what we ended up doing was we increased our use of Zoom and Google Meets. We had a system in place where at least at the high school, the teachers would email all of their students what the expectations and outcomes were by Friday. And however they got to that, so long as it was done by Friday, it was acceptable to them.
Got it. Yeah, and I know, Katie, thank you for sharing the poll results there. So kind of what you guys have already been talking about, Greg, Neal, and Doug, you know, priorities there, you know, choosing a video conferencing platform for remote learning, obtaining more mobile Wi-Fi hotspots. So yeah, I'm not surprised to see the audience kind of sharing that sentiment with you guys. I guess that kind of goes into my next question. There would be, you know, sort of like looking back, what is the top thing, if there is one, you guys may have done differently if you had to go through this process again, which hopefully we don't.
Let's see, what would we do differently? I can share some of the hurdles we ran into and some of the things that we're trying to change for this school year. Was providing support remotely was difficult in some sense. Now, again, with Windows 10 and all that, you've got quick assist, so remote sessions were pretty straightforward. But there was we have our district set that users aren't administrators on their machines, and there was things like printers that needed to be installed. When they took those devices home, they needed to have their printers hooked up. There was some software that they needed. So there was, when you leave the domain, a Windows domain, your administrative rights go out the window because you can't authenticate with the domain. You're not set up for that environment anymore. So we were having to rely on using local administrator accounts when we remoted in. And then a hurdle we run into is when you try to activate administrative privileges on a Windows machine offsite or through a remote session like that, the session pauses. So that was like a huge roadblock that we ran into, where we couldn't do administrative duties on devices, and we had to quickly kind of figure out a way to deploy registry edits and things like that. Like, we really had to get creative in getting support to these people. So next year, we're looking at putting those things in place before the device leaves the network, putting those protocols in place so that we can do the administrative duties on devices when they leave the network, and having the ability to push software and making a portal available for users that they can log into to get software that they need. These are all things that we're having to think of. And the content filter side of things, we need more visibility, we need more reporting, we need parents to be able to have some control of these devices too. You know, we're sending these devices home, and I have 3 boys, and I'm very strict about the usage that they have on a device, and I have control of those devices. And if a school district was to give my child a device, I would want to have some control of that also, and I'd want some insight as to what they're doing. So we're looking at those things too, you know, giving parents options to get reports as to what their child is doing on the internet, or having some control as to when that device is available to them, things like that. Just these are all things we're thinking through.
Yeah, some of our challenges were really around the rotation of devices. A student breaks a device, how does it get back to us? How do we get them? We had already had full remote support capabilities built in. Years ago, I supported a remote sales team, so I already knew the challenges going into that sort of an environment of, you know, how do I support these teachers offsite, off network? I know my domain credentials, you know, aren't going to sync up. So, you know, we had sort of pushed out a known local admin account on all of our laptops, knowing full well that when we come back in, we can resync that, change them out. But being able to keep track of what that is was a little bit more challenging than we thought. You know, yeah. No, I'm good.
Okay, I was gonna ask a follow-up question because there's an interesting one in the chat here. You guys might have kind of touched on it already, but do you guys end up, you know, putting in place any conditional access policies for staff or students, or maybe both?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Very much so. I had those in place anyway, but we implemented 2-factor authentication about 3 years ago for all staff, because we were getting hit pretty hard with phishing attacks, and that really cut down on a lot of phishing compromises, because the accounts now had 2-factor, and we turned on conditional access for all outside of the United States couldn't log in. So if you were outside the United States, you were not able to get into 365. So we set up conditional access rules for the United States to be a safe region, and rely on Microsoft's protocols to ban blacklisted IPs. And we also had the impossible, I think they mentioned the impossible travel restrictions. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there was some hurdles with that too, because we ran into a situation where, you know, we have our IP range and our network deemed as a trusted source. And then when we put our content filter in through the cloud, it funneled that traffic through 26 different nodes across the country. So we had 26 different locations that these devices could potentially check in from. And that triggered a whole bunch of lockouts all of a sudden. So we had to kind of fine tune the conditional access to say, okay, these 26 possible cloud nodes are deemed safe and things like that. There's some tweaks and hurdles that you've kind of got to work through, but it is worth it in the end, because if you put the conditional access rules in place and you put those safeguards in place, you eliminate a lot of just nuisance and mess, really, that can really make your life difficult.
Yeah, and our access controls predated all of this. We were doing all of that already. I don't trust outside the US, and really I try to keep it narrowed down to New England for me. It can become a challenge where what really started that caught me completely off guard was people would fire up their phones as a hotspot,
Mm-hmm.
and now their IP address is showing that they're coming out of Colorado, just based on the way the cell networks are laid out. So we weren't anticipating that. So we had to actually lighten up on our restrictions on our access control lists.
It's interesting. I never would have thought of that for the mobile hotspots. So again, kind of, where would you guys say, cybersecurity and or I guess student data privacy incident monitoring? Obviously the things Doug's tracking for in his report and everything. Where did that fall? I guess for your guys' districts, kind of when things hit the fan, I guess, or was that already at the top of your guys' list, priority-wise, cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's at the top of the list for sure. Thankfully, my director and our administrative team here really sees the importance of it. So I get a lot of support, which is great. And one of the questions I think is the adoption of two-factor authentication. A lot of districts are very scared to go two-factor because it's such it's a hurdle. It can be kind of a nuisance, and they don't want to. Teachers don't like change. You throw two-factor at them, that's change. But if you do it right, it can be very adaptable. We implemented it, and honestly didn't get hit with a lot of pushback for it. But again, if you have the support of your administrative leaders in your district, that cybersecurity and security in a whole can go really well. Security is not convenient at all to any user, but it's essential.
Cybersecurity was number one for us, and it had been for a while. Our state, New Hampshire, had passed a law stating that we needed to implement a subset of the NIST 171 controls. So our districts had already been starting working on that, which for our teachers, that was a shift. A lot of them weren't paying attention when that legislation was going through the process or even when it was implemented. So that really upped our game as far as the state goes. And part of that was a data privacy agreement that we need to get signed before we can deploy any software. So the software vendor also needs to be compliant with that same subset of 171 as we are, which it limits what software is used on the devices. What it didn't limit was every software vendor in the world throwing up their stuff saying, everyone's got free access until July, come try it. So now that flooded us with, well, it's free, we can just use it, right? And it's like, well, no, if you want to, we have a process. We need to get it vetted, ensure that it works, ensure that it's safe and secure and it meets our standards, and then we can roll that out. So it was a shift.
Yeah, my sense actually, Neal and Greg, is that you may not be wholly typical of what I saw, right? So certainly anecdotally, there were lots of reports of the use of those free tools, right? Of school districts that really, there are many school districts that have historically allowed educators great flexibility in choosing the tools that they use, right? And that's starting to change over time, right? But in this shift, there certainly was that going on. I think there was a priority on availability and access, right? I mean, you both talked about moving on a dime, right? And making sure that kids had access. And I know, at least anecdotally, I have heard many school district IT directors say, we did things on our network that I was not comfortable with, that we're probably gonna regret, but the mandate was get everybody the tools and get them working first. And now you're kind of backfilling. So, I think we're likely to see a little bit more centralization of approvals. Unfortunately, all the controversy around Zoom and the Zoom bombing incidents, right? Which, you know, at some level are concerning, at another level, it doesn't feel like it's that crazy hard of a technical, you know, issue. And it sounds like Zoom has made, you know, tremendous steps in trying to address that. So, right, it's so anyway, it sounds like maybe you two are maybe not quite the norm, at least for what I've seen anecdotally.
Yeah, I don't want to end up on any of your lists. That's my goal in life.
Stay off my map. Okay.
I want to stay off your map. And I use your map when I talk at conferences. I bring it up and say, I don't want to be on this map. So we're going to talk about how not to get on this map. So,
it's no badge of shame. It's okay.
But there was I lost my train of thought there. Sorry.
No, you're fine, Greg. So as we can kind of, I see a question here that I do want to get to, but it kind of plays into the next point or question I was having for you guys. So come the next school year, say August for you, Greg, and Neal, when you guys start back up again, are you planning for remote learning, I guess completely, in class, a hybrid? Kind of what do you guys?
It's a very evolving situation, but what's been disclosed and released publicly at this point is we are going to give parents the choice if they want to keep their children home and do e-learning at home, they can have that option. They have to commit to the full semester, and they have to have reliable internet and a device at home to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's option one. And also we're going to do 10 e-learning days. We've scheduled 10 e-learning days into our academic calendar as kind of like to get everybody kind of familiar with e-learning. So there'll be like 2 days before, I think it's like Thanksgiving break, mm-hmm. And maybe winter break. There's some days in there that we've added to the calendar that are going to be e-learning days, and they will be designated on these days. Kids will learn from home, and mm-hmm. that'll kind of help get everybody familiar with the process. And I think that's the idea behind that. And that may expand. I mean, that may grow into something bigger. I mean, next year it may be 20 e-learning days. I'm not sure, but I mean, it's just kind of like baby steps. Mm-hmm. But it's part of our action items. It's part of our regular routine.
Yeah, and for us, no decision has yet to be made. We are sort of waiting on the state. The state says they're going to give us guidelines by the end of the month. So while we're planning all three, mm-hmm. we're not fully committing to anything yet until we find out what the state is recommending or supporting. But we're in New Hampshire, and local control is a huge issue for us. So even, you know, if the state recommends it, if it's not written into law, we sort of take it as it goes. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so my biggest concern is, you know, if we do a hybrid model, do I have the internal bandwidth to support, you know, all 250 of my staff instantaneously starting an online class, right? Can I handle that load on my network? I don't know.
Right. And then there's a question that was asked a little bit earlier. It kind of plays into this. But you know, what solutions do you guys all see for K-12 academic integrity or honesty when remote learning? And then, you know, when remote learning, a follow-up there would be if you guys are allowing your students to tunnel back into your network via a VPN or most of your services cloud-based now.
Right. Everything's cloud-based for us. We've tried to eliminate as much. The students don't have to access anything internally. Right. We have some network drives at the administrative level that they map to, but we have a solution in place that allows us to tie in our map drives with a single sign-on dashboard. So we use ClassLink. Don't mind sharing. We use ClassLink for that, and they're absolutely excellent. So all our resources are cloud-driven. Everything's in the cloud, so there shouldn't be anything that they need to get to that's in-house. One thing that will have to change is, like, a lot of our applications in our single sign-on require on district IPs being assigned to the cloud software. Like you can't access the cloud software unless you're coming from the school network. So those vendors are going to have to release that or lighten that up or figure out how to do it by region. Those are changes but that's on them. That's not on us. So they'll have to figure that out. Yeah. So we're cloud.
Yeah, we're also 100% cloud. I've got no good reason to allow anybody back into my network once they're outside. There's just, I don't care how convenient it is. There is no good reason to do it. So I just don't allow them to do it. But we also don't, our solution or solutions, we allow to be accessed from any IP address out on the cloud. We don't limit it to, sort of geofencing our stuff, because it was just more work than it was worth.
John Rock asked a question about 2FA on staff and students, staff only, and conditional access for students, again, just in the United States. Because kids love VPNs. There's a free VPN for every device and every smartphone that's out there, and there's 50 to 100 of them. I mean, there's just hundreds of them, and kids love VPNs because they try to get around the content filter, and that creates a lot of nuisances for VPNs and accessing Office 365, and all of a sudden you're accessing Office 365 from Italy or France. So it kind of cuts their access to their cloud resources and their homework when they turn on that VPN because they can't log in. It won't let them in. So we use conditional access a lot tighter for student level.
Elizabeth asked a question early on about how we're handling distance learning with kids without coverage. And what's been helpful is we're allowing them to come into the parking lot. Our Wi-Fi extends out into the parking lot of all the schools. We also, the town libraries have been accessible. So even from their cars parked in the parking lot of the libraries, and McDonald's has it, Dunkin' Donuts has it, all of those places that are open have access. So you're just seeing cars accumulating in parking lots that normally wouldn't be there.
Yep.
But that's sort of how our students have been getting around it.
We're testing converting some school buses to hotspot school buses, putting internet on the buses and driving those buses to neighborhoods that don't have internet, and letting students utilize the internet access that we're basically like an e-learning bus, and they'll have laptops and whatnot that they can use. And we're looking at trying that also.
Right. I guess a follow-up to you, Neal, when you mentioned, parents or students and parents, maybe, sitting in parking lots of Dunkin' Donuts or McDonald's or anything, and with those not being an unmanaged network, I guess any concerns you have there of them using those versus coming to your guys' parking lot and using?
No, for the simple fact that I treat all of my end devices as hostile to begin with. Whether I own them or not, there is zero trust there.
Right.
So how they get on, it really doesn't matter. Google encrypts everything anyways. So even if they're spoofing the SSID, it's going to be encrypted. And in all honesty, there's nobody in my communities that has the time to crack those encryptions. It's just, for them, it's not worth it.
Got it. Let's see here. So now that we're 3 months into it, looking ahead now, and people got kind of like their bearings with this somewhat. Kind of what are some silver linings you guys have seen in your districts or just in the industry overall in this forced quote unquote move to remote learning, I guess?
For us, silver lining is we can do it. I mean, I'm just extremely impressed with the teachers and staff and students alike that really kind of came together with understanding that this was going to understanding what was needed, and then also from a technical level, our technicians and the technician staff, the amount that was dumped on our team, and we're a pretty small team at the technician level, about a dozen, but the amount that was expected of them to provide support at this scale, it was just incredible. and to have the success that we had with the whole rollout and the whole transition, and to be able to get everything done that we did. It also kind of forced our hand to try new things, whereas before we were kind of scared to try some things, like maybe we didn't want to do that because it would be too disruptive. There's nothing more disruptive than a pandemic. I mean, it's completely disruptive. So it allows us to kind of step outside the box and think outside the box, and try things that we wouldn't normally try for fear of failure, or being disruptive in that sense. And in doing that, it allowed us to discover some new ways of doing things and get creative, and then look at applying that creative mindset to next year. And just that, to me, that is a great silver lining. It's a learning experience. If you'd have told me, 6 months ago that, hey, you're about to go through a life event that's on a global scale in your job and you're going to do some good with it, I mean, I would have been like, what are you talking about? But truly, it's just been, for career wise, it's just been a great thing to be a part of. As bad as it is, it's been the growth that I've seen in just my technicians and myself included, has been great. It's just been really good for them, and they know now that they can do difficult things, and that's a great silver lining to take away.
For me, the silver linings, there's a lot. There's a whole lot. But really, the staff, we're a small staff. There's two of us, myself and a technician, and it really demonstrated to our staff, the teaching staff, the administrators, the students, that, this IT department can scale and meet their challenges. Whatever gets thrown at them, that they don't have to worry, they don't have to panic, because IT's here to support you. But I'm seeing that trend across K-12 collectively. Like the entire IT space in K-12 has risen to this challenge. And it's been incredible to see and to hear all of those different stories about, the measures that we're going through to ensure that those students are getting educated. Another thing, my background's a little bit different, but we now have a fully functioning, tested continuity of operations plan across the nation. We've all done it, right? So, and before, everyone was hesitant to write it or document it. Guess what? It happened. Now, if we just go back and write down what we did, we've got a fantastic base to move forward on.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are good observations and silver linings. I think, by and large, it's correct to say that the vast majority of school IT departments around the country went through fire at the drop of a dime, and did their part, and took a lot from it. In the continuity planning, I think it's a hilarious observation and very, very true, Neal. To be a little contrarian, though, I mean, I think from the policy perspective, there is deep, deep concern about students' learning trajectory over, what happened this spring. And, we made the best of what was available to us, but it's not what it would have been if students were in school. And I think, as we think about going back to school in the fall, it's one thing to have been with your teachers for, at least two or so months if they were in the semester system, or 6 or so months if it was a year-long class, right? And then go to remote. For those who are starting the fall fully remote, I mean, you won't know your classmates, or you won't know all your classmates. You probably don't know your teacher. Everything we know about online learning is that personal connection really makes a difference. And it really helps to opt in and want that experience, right? If you're not given that choice, you don't have that personal connection with that teacher already, it just makes it that much harder. I know there are some that have viewed this as like this great big silver lining for ed tech. This is going to be the shining moment. We get to demonstrate that, our tools are great and we can do, online learning at scale. And, I think from what I've seen of parent surveys and parent sentiment, they're going to be really happy in many cases to get kids back into school and face-to-face learning. And not that it can't work and not that it doesn't, like they can't connect and get something from it. It's just not the same. Now, that's not on you guys, right? I mean, I'm just speaking really, really broadly about it. But, I know we want to take lessons learned from it, but this has just been a tough experience and less than ideal, I think, fairly for most of us.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yep,
Just
completely.
because we can do something doesn't mean we should. Right? So we prove the point that we can flex, but let's not.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. This situation, it held us over to the summer, and we got through the rest of the school year to the summer. But like one of the questions that just came in about VDI solutions and CTIs and Autodesk and these big applications that are required in labs.
Mm-hmm.
We're not set up for that. We're not set up for we don't do VDI. And that's why the hybrid model is so important. And these students are going to have to really think about, what direction they're going. Let's say that the pandemic thing goes on for much longer, and we're in this situation for an extended period of time. Students are going to have to kind of think about their career path at the grade level as to what is it I want to do. Do I want to be, let's use the Autodesk software, the CAD solution. Do I want to focus on that? I don't have the resources at home. I'm going to have to go to school. Those resources are there. Whereas another student that maybe not have that interest will change direction and do everything online, and their mindset's going to have to be on what's available online, because they don't want to go to school and they want to stay home for whatever the risk factor may be. There is no one answer or solution for this. We definitely got through the final part of our school year, and thankfully we just had a few months where we needed to do that. There's a lot of work ahead of every school district in the nation that has to think about how this is going to work, and it's not going to be perfect, and it won't be perfect for years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to kind of follow up on that, I saw a question come up in the chat too. What training are students receiving on data privacy best practices, right? Maybe not right now, because I know it's summer, but maybe come when they return to school when the 2020 school year starts, or maybe right before this previous school year ended. I know a lot of it's on teachers, and doing cybersecurity awareness training, but anything for students you guys have been thinking about?
We do a digital citizenship training for all students. They have to get signed off on that before they're given a device. I think it might have gone through, originally it was through Edmodo. They had a great little digital citizenship like program. But it's at the school level. The schools have this little protocol class that the kids go through about the importance of being safe online and privacy and things like that. And they have to complete that before they're given a device to use. And it has to be signed, and it's on file at the school level. So there is something in place. Now that'll have to evolve a little bit with home learning. I mean, because now it's changed. Now you're at home. A question came up about webcams and seeing things in the background, and now you've got maybe brothers or sisters younger and privacy issues there. And all of that has to be taken into account. We didn't allow for webcams to be turned on for students. We had policies. That's why we didn't go the Zoom route. We have teams, and we could control the policies on what was allowed. Kids couldn't talk to each other privately, and everybody wanted to jump on Zoom. Not bashing Zoom. We're using Zoom right now, but initially when this all happened, everybody was on Zoom, and there was a lot of security concerns, and my district wanted to use Zoom, and I was like, we have Teams. Let's use Teams. We have control over Teams. We can record the sessions. We can cut access off if we need to cut access off. There's just a lot of control that we have at that level, and it's in place already. And I trust Microsoft to have our best interests at heart, because we're a paying customer of their product. So there was, there's a lot to think about, and again, it's just going to be evolving every moment as we go through it.
Yeah, for us, It's also at the school level. The
Okay.
individual homeroom classroom teachers are responsible for ensuring that training happens. We give them a device prior to anyways, because the thought there is, how are they taking this training without a device to access it, because it's all web-based. So we, but that was, that was our process. We're smaller too. We don't have the scope and scale that Greg has.
And we don't have the scope and scale that Atlanta has. I mean, it's
Right.
just like, well, there's just, I can't even imagine that.
Right.
That has to go in, that's involved in that.
Let's see. So a question come in. Do you guys worry that the demand for distance learning is pulling the attention of district leadership away from longer term initiatives to improve security posture? Or kind of how are you guys tackling that?
I'm worried about money. I'm worried about money. There's just, everybody's going to feel the pinch of this. So there's going to be cuts, and cuts could come in many shapes and forms. And you could get cut on your security protocols. You could get cut on, we can't afford this software anymore. We need to apply it somewhere else. And that's a concern for me. And I'll fight that as much as I can, the importance of the security side of it. Again, and good leadership that understands that is important for any school district. But yeah, I mean, money is a thing. We had, hardware for refreshes in our district that needed to be done, and plans were all in motion for that for summer, and now all of that's kind of been thrown on its head because the whole environment and need has changed. So yeah, that's definitely a concern.
Yeah, for me, it's a little different. I'm sitting on that leadership team, so I've got direct say and direct access as to ensuring that security stays on top of their radar, and it is moving forward, and we're not losing ground because of the distance learning. But I agree with Greg. As an example, my budget shifted. I had anticipated replacing most of the projectors in the district with large touchscreen interactive displays. That's not going to happen, period. All that money is going towards ensuring that our laptop refresh cycle is in place and strong, and our Chromebook replacement cycle is in place and strong. It's really focusing on the end user and their immediate requirements and needs.
And that's going to get difficult too, because the demand everywhere for mobile devices is going to go way up, and there's going to be a huge backlog of devices not being available for the beginning of the school year. I mean, it's just, the demand is going to be overwhelming, and I don't think new devices, the districts that want to get large amounts of devices aren't going to be able to get them for months after the school year starts.
Yeah, I know from my perspective, there was increasing traction for cybersecurity conversations among school leadership groups, and momentum for that. And then the pandemic hits and everything shifted. All the leadership priorities shifted. I've certainly seen school districts, try to purchase and deploy, literally, particularly the big districts, like tens of thousands of new devices. I mean, there were stories about schools not being able to purchase Chromebooks because they just were not on the market to be had. But what I'm not hearing in those investments is, well, are you, how much larger is your IT support staff going to be? Have you thought about your software licenses? How about your network connectivity? Definitely not conversations about, well, endpoint protection or other risks that we would be introducing by bringing these new platforms. It's and then the budget hit that we kind of expect. Now, recently there's been talk in Congress about a school-specific stimulus, right, to help schools manage not just the fall, but like the next couple of years, because everybody understands that state and local budgets are taking a hit and they lag in how this works. But we'll see. I'm not willing to bet on anything that Congress is going to do right now, particularly in an election year. Right? So it's really difficult. I mean, if The only way that I could see it shifting is really a bad news story. Like the good news that we could focus more on something. The way it happens is in the fall, when we go back to school, we have a spate of incidents, right? And, there's the incidents that I track are of varying degrees of severity, but we've had some significant ones. And honestly, for school leaders, all it takes, or for policymakers, I'm sorry, all it takes is one sort of example to really laser focus people's attention. The bad news is that someone has to be that example and Greg end up on my map, right? Which,
Yeah.
but unfortunately that's the only way I see that story changing in the short term, other than what we're doing. And thanks Jake and Katie and ManagedMethods for bringing this conversation together. There's a lot of hunger for these conversations. Right. There are people who are worrying about this in school districts. We are talking more about it. And, we can continue to try to push it, and we need to. But leadership is super distracted, and understandably so.
Right. Well, I know we could take a whole nother hour and talk about that. But we're getting close to the top of the hour here, and kind of brings us to the end of our time. So, first off, I want to thank Doug, Neal, and Greg for your guys' time and taking time out of your busy days to join us and our audience too. And thanks audience too for chiming in and contributing to the conversation. If you'd like to follow up with Greg or Neal or Doug and learn anything more, you can reach out to me directly if you'd like. You can send in my email in the follow-up, or you could reach out to our contact page on the ManagedMethods website. Doug's, the K12 Cybersecurity Resource Center, K12cybermap.com, if you're not familiar with it.
Actually, K12cybersecure.com.
Cybersecure.com, sorry. K12cybersecure.com. And yeah, so again, Greg, Neal, Doug, thanks for joining. Thanks for what you guys do in K12 education to keep students, staff, teachers, and communities safe online. And thanks to everyone who attended today. And then we look forward to seeing you guys at our next event, and then hopefully in the near future in person when conferences are back to being in person. So again, thank you everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
All right, you too.